Let's look at the top 3 things you don't really need to use the jQuery library for. jQuery.ajax, jQuery.ready, and the jQuery DOM selector. You're watching DevTips, and I'm David. What do you think about my new studio? It's actually my mother-in-law's yoga room, but I would say it's more of a storage room, actually. So in the spirit of Travis, who recorded DevTips previously in his garage, I think this is it's on the same path. Once upon a time, there was a browser called Microsoft Internet Explorer 6. It shipped in 2001 with Microsoft Windows XP, and it conquered the web world. It won the browser war, and it had a market share of 80% at a time. Problem with IE6 was that it was buggy, and it didn't really follow web standards. And because they had won this browser war, it was okay, because they were the ruler and the biggest. Sort of like what Google is doing with AMP pages. In 2006, IE6 was still a major player, and you sort of had to accommodate for them. Web 2.0 was taking off, and I think one of the reasons was because of jQuery. jQuery is this library at the time, this is over 10 years ago, that really improved the lives of web developers. Its main thing was the DOM selector, because at that time it wasn't trivial to query the DOM. You could get tags by name, like the tags, or you could get by ID, but you couldn't fetch classes in a simple way. But it also had handy features for checkboxes, toggling them, and changing the color of things, and fetching things through the XML request, the XHR or AJAX. And it was easy to pick up values and manipulate the DOM. If you wanted to build something slightly more advanced, like a web application, jQuery was the way to go. And pretty soon jQuery, because it was so good, it started shipping with like Microsoft's .NET environment, and all WordPress themes relied on jQuery, and jQuery sort of became a de facto standard in the web developing world. Today, it's a different world. Standards have caught up, and Microsoft are building great browsers, the Edge browser. We have reactive frameworks, observables. You can write really fancy JavaScript in the client or in the server. You can sort of use the same JavaScript, and you could not do this over 10 years ago. So jQuery did things very well. Great job, jQuery. But today it's obsolete. You don't really need jQuery, and it frustrates me when I see people use jQuery for things you don't really need jQuery for. If all you want to do is sort of like select things in the DOM, or wait for the DOM to load, or just fetch things from different places, you don't really need all these jQuery things anymore. And I just want to show some examples on how you can do it without jQuery today. You don't need jQuery. One small thing though, because jQuery is so prevalent, and because not most, but a lot of sites are using it, it's still cached in the browser because they are served on CDNs that are cached. So they don't actually add that much load time to sites. So it's sort of okay to use it. It just feels unnecessary when you can do without it. Here I have a small example I made in a CodePen. For the number 1, let's try to take this button and tie something to it, like an alert pop-up, by just using jQuery. So first, let's find it. Here in the HTML, we have the example 1, and then we have highlight class, and then there are 2 buttons here, so it's the first button. Okay, I would write like this, number 1. And because we don't have any classes, I would just say take the first of this type, nth of type, and then I'd add an on-click handler. On-click takes an anonymous function, and let's do something. Alert jQuery, yay! So now it should, when it runs, it ties the on-click handler to the first button here. Oops, it's example 1, of course. Oops. So let's click here. jQuery, it works. How would we do this without jQuery? We'd use the document.querySelector. it returns just the first element, and all we need is the first element. So document.querySelector, and we'll use the same selector. But for the second button. And to that, we will add an event listener. And this is the same what jQuery is doing. It's adding an event listener. The click event. And then we'll do the same. Nay query. Let's go for that. Nay query. So you see that it's sort of the same amount of code to do this. It's not really that difficult or different. Okay, second example. So we often use jQuery.ready to wait for documents. So jQuery.ready and then something like this. But then in later versions of jQuery, you can just do it, or you should just do it by doing like this. jQuery like that. And then here you do what you want to do once everything has loaded. And then you could write like this function, but in the new syntax, we can write the shorthand, which is just this function. And then we'll just go and set some value here once it's loaded. So we'll see, let's look at the HTML, example 2. We have the input ID here, example 2a. So let's just use that. And we'll use the jQuery selector to stay in the jQuery world. So let's go for the ID and just set a value. And then you do, well, DOM is ready. And now it will update. If we save. Okay, we got the value here. So how would we do this without jQuery? We would use what jQuery is probably doing behind the scenes. We would wait for the DOMContentLoaded. We wait for the DOMContentLoaded event. It's fired when the initial HTML document has been completely loaded and parsed. Without waiting for the images and stuff. If you want to wait for more, that's when you use load. But we just want to know that we have all the HTML so we can start modifying it. So document dot, and now we'll just add an event listener to the document. Add event listener, and we'll add the listener DOMContentLoaded. And once this happens, we will just call a function that will update this. And we'll do this without jQuery code, so we'll just do it the old-fashioned way. Get element by ID. And the ID is example 2b. And this doesn't need the hash bang. It's just the name of the ID. And we'll just set its value to something. DOM is ready again. Oh, well, it's only ready once. DOM is ready. Okay, so how do we know that this works? We can make a small iteration that will just run and just use processing power and do stuff before other things happen. So let's just add like a small thing to just fake that something is happening, that there is more content being fetched. But we want to see that even though we run this first, this should not happen until everything else has loaded. So we'll just fake that more things are going on by making a small for loop. Let I equals 0 and I is less than 1 million perhaps, or 10 million. And then just increment. And then we'll just do nothing while waiting. So we see that when we save, it's waiting and then it's updating. So it's tying these handlers, the DOMContentLoaded, these event listeners. But then it has to work, and nothing is happening until it has worked. Let's just save and see that again. Here. Work. DOMContentLoaded. Okay, let's just comment this out because it's a pain in the... jQuery.ajax. I said this was what got me into... Probably the CSS selector thing was the main thing for me to get into jQuery. But what made me stick with jQuery, like 10 years ago, was the jQuery.ajax function. How would we do this with Ajax? We would first make a handler on the click, example3, and it's a button, and has the button dark class. Let's add an on-click handler, and once we've clicked, we'll do something. And what we'll do is call the AJAX function. And with AJAX, you need to send some params like the URL. And the URL we're using is this one, the example URL. And this example URL is just gets whatever you send them euros, and then we will get what is €1. It's just a currency conversion thing. We have the base as euros, and let's just see whatever you send to them is in US dollars. So we need to fetch this value. And that value is called example3 URL. So let's fetch that. Example, or select that rather, and get the value. And then we know that we saw here that it's a JSON, so we can just type that here. Data type, and we know that it's JSON-P because it's from a different server. And before you wrote success, but these days you write done. And once it's done, you get something. We know it's a JSON, and then we can do something with the JSON. And we will just update this field with some cool text. What is that called? I think it's example3a. And we'll just set the value to that one to something. So we want to know how much, whatever we send in, we know that we send in euro here. But we know that it says euro here. So we'll just use this as a thing. So how much is 1, and in the JSON we have the base. €1 equals how many USDs? Okay. And where is the USD? It's in the rates, and then just USD, rates USD. So it's in the JSON, the rates, and the USD. And if it doesn't work, if there's a failure, we get an error, then we'll just do something with that, console.log the error. Okay. Not the best error handling, but something. Save this. Will this work? Boom! We fetch the euro here is from the JSON, and this value is also from the JSON. So that's how you do it with jQuery.ajax. But how would we do this without jQuery.ajax? We'll do the same thing. We'll just first we'll query and find and add an on-click handler to this. So document dot, let's just use get element by ID, because does it have an ID? No, I don't think that has an ID. That button, no ID. Okay, then just use the query selector. Query selector. And we'll do the same thing. It's example3 button.bottom info instead. So once we have that, let's add an on-click handler to it. And on the on-click, we'll do a function, And what the function will do is basically it will just fetch a URL. And that URL is this one. So we should just fetch that one, but with document.getElementById, and we have the example3 URL, and we'll use that value. And now the cool thing is that this is a promise. So the promises look sort of the same. The promise is just basically, okay, we run this, and then whenever we get whatever we're waiting for, we'll do something. So we'll do like this. And then when we get a response, we'll do something. And the way fetch does is that it returns a response, and it has a convenience function which can convert the response to a JSON. And in the AJAX example, the jQuery.ajax, we already specified that here instead, that we knew that we were waiting for JSON. But here we say it once we get it, and we expect it to be JSON, so we just convert it to JSON. And then once we have the JSON, we'll do whatever we want to do. And this is the same thing, sort of. We'll go for the document.getElementById, and it's example3b instead, and then we'll update that value. Set the value, and we know that the data is the same that we expect, so we'll just use the same thing here. And then we should catch whatever errors pop up. So if there's an error, let's just catch that and console.log the error. Will this work? AJAX works. Without AJAX, without jQuery, boom, same thing. What is cool here is that we can use whatever here. Let's just put my native currency SEK and just update here. Boom, boom. Or Danish crowns, I don't know. Now, David, you're thinking, what about the compatibility? These are new techniques. What's also a feature was with jQuery was that it sort of just you had this one API, jQuery API, and all those functions, and then it just sort of fixed everything around compatibility. It just made it work with IE6. So the query selector, how many people are using it? Or how many browsers? Okay, all browsers. Globally, 98.37%. And I say that missing out 1 or 2%. Who are we missing out? We can't even find them, the ones we're missing out that don't support this. Perhaps it's the ones that don't even have JavaScript enabled, because all the browsers are supporting this, so it doesn't really matter. We're building with JavaScript, so we need JavaScript. Can I use DOMContentLoaded? Uh, 98% support it. It's the same thing. The ones that don't have JavaScript perhaps don't support it, because what I can see here is that all the major browser versions support it. Oh, some IE6, IE8 doesn't support it. Too bad. It was released in 2009, and then IE9 was released in 2011. 2011 is 7 years ago. If someone is using an old computer with IE6, 7, 8, do I want to support them? How wide are... What is the resolution on that desktop or whatever? I don't care. And now AJAX or fetch. Fetch is pretty new. Let's see, what is the support for fetch? It says here 88%. That is not that much. Okay, IE11. 2.68%. I don't care about IE. Is IE11 the latest browser in Windows? Is the browser in Windows? What's the default browser in Windows? Is Microsoft Edge, right? Right? I don't know. Okay, fetch is a bit tricky because it's not supported by 12% are not supporting it of the users globally. IE is a big one, 2.68%, but Edge is the new browser, the new Internet Explorer. And of course Edge supports it, it's a good browser. But then we have iOS Safari, which, okay, iOS, the iOSers, they upgrade pretty frequently. So here it's like globally 0.53%, but in Sweden it's 2% that are still on 10.2. So that's a bit disappointing. So I'd say for fetch, if you're building a website that you want everyone to use, you should use a polyfill that sort of replicates the fetch functionality with a certain code for those browsers that are not compatible with it. But using promises is such a better way of working that I think it's worth it. You should use fetch. So there are things you can totally accomplish without jQuery. jQuery.ajax, use fetch. You may use a polyfill if you're having old people using it. jQuery.ready, you don't have to. DOMContentLoaded, supported by everything. And the DOM selector, the jQuery selector thing, you can just use document.querySelector. And it's also supported by almost everything. I'm David and you just watched an episode of DevTips. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't, write that in the comments. If you did, write that in the comments. If you have ideas for other episodes, write that in the comments. I read all the comments, so I really appreciate you giving feedback. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.